The early days of the Second World War were defined by a profound and dangerous miscalculation on the part of the German military command. The swift, brutal success of the Blitzkrieg across Poland and France had instilled an overwhelming confidence in the Wehrmacht and its formidable Panzerwaffe. German tank design philosophy was centered on superior optics, tactical flexibility, and the groundbreaking concept of synchronized combined arms operations. The initial British armored vehicles fielded against them in 1940 and the North African Campaign were often found severely wanting in comparison. Tanks like the Crusaders suffered from persistent mechanical unreliability and possessed inadequate armor and armament against the newer German medium tanks. This pattern of qualitative inferiority established a narrative within German intelligence that fundamentally underestimated the capability and potential of British tank technology. German tankers, who proudly manned their technically superior Panzer III and IV variants, viewed the early British cruiser and infantry tanks with a degree of dismissive arrogance. They considered the British approach to be a confused mess of undergunned and poorly protected designs, lacking a coherent doctrine for armored warfare. Even as the British introduced better designs like the Valentine and the Churchill, and later American tanks like the M4 Sherman, the ingrained German perspective of their own unquestionable superiority persisted. This deeply entrenched institutional bias would prove to be one of the Wehrmacht's most significant strategic errors as the war progressed. The technical gap began to close slowly, but the psychological perception of British armor as perpetually second-rate remained fixed in the minds of German field commanders. This confidence was bolstered by the sheer hitting power of their own heavy tanks, the Tiger and the Panther, which seemed invincible on the defensive battlefields of the later war. The Allies were forced into a desperate cycle of fielding stopgap measures and relying on numerical superiority to counter the devastating effect of German heavy guns. It was a deadly imbalance where British crews had to rely on flanking maneuvers and luck to defeat their German counterparts in a direct engagement. The initial, poor performance had cast a long, dark shadow over all subsequent British armor designs in the eyes of their German opponents. This fundamental underestimation would eventually lead to a series of sharp, painful shocks when a truly capable British design finally entered the fray. The battlefield itself was about to deliver a harsh lesson that no amount of ingrained arrogance could overcome. The complacent German view was a vulnerability waiting for a powerful new adversary to exploit. The strategic landscape shifted dramatically with the Allied landings in Normandy in the summer of 1944. The British and Commonwealth forces were immediately confronted by the full force of the German Panzerwaffe in a dense, hedgerow-laced landscape known as the Bocage. The battlegrounds of France revealed in sharp focus the inadequacy of the standard Allied tanks when facing the German Panther and Tiger tanks. The formidable 75 mm and 88 mm main guns on these heavy German machines could routinely engage and destroy most Allied armor at long range with impunity. Allied tanks like the M4 Sherman, despite their reliability and sheer numbers, suffered disproportionately high losses in head-to-head confrontations. The most effective British tank in the inventory, the Sherman Firefly, was a necessary and brilliant conversion of the American hull to mount the potent 17-pounder anti-tank gun. However, the Firefly was always a compromise, limited in number, and easily identifiable by its long barrel, which made it a priority target for German gunners. British commanders desperately needed a homegrown tank design that could match and even surpass the firepower and mobility of the best German offerings without resorting to field modifications. The necessity was driven by the clear operational requirement to have a tank that was fast, mechanically sound, and capable of defeating the Panther and Tiger at typical combat ranges. The existing British designs, which had often prioritized infantry support or high speed over pure anti-tank prowess, were simply not equipped for the final stages of a total continental war. The Wehrmacht's technological edge and armor had become a severe impediment to the Allied advance, threatening to stall the entire Western Front campaign. The Allied war machine could absorb the losses, but the psychological toll and the cost in highly trained crews were becoming unacceptable. The crisis of firepower and protection demanded a completely new vehicle, a true cruiser tank that embodied the best lessons learned from 5 years of grueling armored combat. It was a race against time to develop and mass produce a tank that could finally end the German qualitative advantage and restore the confidence of the tank crews. This new design needed to be a decisive answer to the challenge posed by the formidable German heavy armor. The future of the British Armored Corps hinged on the success of this urgent and critical design program. The answer to this pressing tactical and strategic requirement was the Cruiser Tank A34, soon to be formally named the Comet. Development of the Comet began in the workshops and design bureaus of the Leland Motors Company, aiming to fundamentally correct the shortcomings of its predecessor, the Cromwell tank. The Cromwell was a fast and agile tank, but its primary weapon, the 75 mm Vickers gun, lacked the necessary armor-piercing velocity to reliably defeat the Panther's sloped glacis plate. Designers recognized that a successful cruiser tank for the late war had to be an optimal balance of firepower, mobility, and armor protection. The new vehicle was a substantial evolution of the successful Cromwell hull, incorporating lessons about reliability and crew ergonomics from years of continuous field service. However, the key and most radical departure was the installation of the revolutionary new main armament, a gun developed specifically to take on the most formidable German vehicles. The designers meticulously focused on achieving maximum internal space for ammunition stowage and crew comfort while keeping the overall vehicle profile relatively low. Structural improvements were made throughout the chassis to better handle the stresses of the increased weight and the powerful recoil force of the new weapon system. The highly reliable and respected Rolls-Royce Meteor engine was retained, giving the Comet excellent speed and cross-country performance, a characteristic hallmark of the cruiser tank concept. The combination of high-speed maneuverability and overwhelming firepower was intended to catch the slower, heavier German tanks off guard and outflank them. The Comet represented a new level of professionalism and maturity in British tank design, moving past the early war's experimental and often flawed concepts. It was a concerted effort to produce a modern, standardized, and extremely effective fighting machine that could serve reliably in the harsh conditions of a European winter campaign. The entire project was given the highest priority, reflecting the desperate need for a tank capable of going toe-to-toe with the best the Wehrmacht could offer. This tank was designed not just to participate in the final push, but to lead it with decisive striking power. The heart of the Comet's superiority and its most critical innovation was its main armament, the 77 mm high-velocity gun. Despite its designation, The 77 mm HV was essentially a shortened and redesigned version of the immensely powerful 17-pounder gun, but with a new breech and a different casing for the propellant charge. This crucial modification allowed the gun to be mounted in a standard, smaller turret ring than the long-barreled 17-pounder required, which was a significant design constraint. The ammunition was non-interchangeable with the true 17-pounder, but the performance characteristics in terms of muzzle velocity and penetration remained outstanding. The new gun fired a formidable armor-piercing discarding sabot, or APDS, round that could defeat the frontal armor of the Panther tank at tactically useful ranges. This level of performance was a monumental step up from the anemic armor-piercing capabilities of the older British 75 mm and 6-pounder guns. For the first time, a main battle tank organically developed within the British design ethos possessed the overwhelming firepower to genuinely frighten the Panzerwaffe. The high velocity of the shell meant a flatter trajectory, which in turn significantly increased the accuracy of the gunner, especially in the long-range duels common in open terrain. The combination of the weapon's power and the Comet's speed meant that it could choose its engagement, strike a decisive blow, and relocate before the heavier German tanks could effectively respond. The new turret, which housed this powerful weapon, was also a more modern and well-protected casting than those of earlier British designs. It offered better ballistic protection and a more ergonomically efficient working space for the crew, contributing to a higher rate of accurate fire. The adoption of the 77 mm HV gun was a definitive signal that the British had abandoned the notion of purely cruiser or infantry tanks in favor of a universal fighting vehicle concept. The gun instantly transformed the Comet from a merely fast cruiser into a lethal tank killer, a genuine threat to the German armored elite. This weapon system ensured the Comet would not repeat the mistakes of its predecessors, which were consistently outgunned by German opposition. Despite the urgency of its development, the Comet arrived very late in the conflict on the Western Front. The first production models were delivered and issued to the 11th Armored Division in late 1944, a full 6 months after the D-Day landings. This delay meant the tank missed the crucial, intense armored battles of the Normandy breakout, which were fought primarily with the earlier Sherman and Cromwell variants. Its initial combat debut coincided with the closing stages of the Battle of the Bulge in January 1945, a period of fierce, brutal winter warfare in the Ardennes. The appearance of the Comet was largely unexpected by German intelligence, which had become complacent about the threat level posed by new British equipment. Logistical challenges and the necessity for thorough crew training meant that the tanks were committed to action slowly and in relatively small numbers at first. However, once deployed, the Comet immediately began to make its presence felt during the Allied push to the Rhine River. Its superior performance in the freezing, challenging conditions of the winter campaign quickly earned the respect of the veteran British tank crews. The combination of its reliable engine, better armor, and devastating main gun proved perfectly suited for the rapid, fluid movements of the final invasion of Germany. The Wehrmacht was already severely weakened by continuous combat, a desperate lack of fuel, and the constant attrition of its best units. But the introduction of a new, highly capable British tank was an unwelcome surprise that further complicated their already impossible defensive situation. The late arrival meant the Comet did not win the war single-handedly, but it certainly played a disproportionately important role in the final, critical stages of the conflict. It was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, disrupting the German belief in their qualitative armor superiority at the worst possible time. The tank's presence announced that the Allies were not just relying on overwhelming numbers, but were also fielding genuinely competitive and superior technology. The Wehrmacht was forced to confront a new, deadly variable just as its capacity for adaptation had been completely exhausted. The rapid and effective integration of the Comet into frontline service was a testament to the professionalism of the British Army's Armored Corps training establishments. Crews transitioning from the Cromwell found the Comet to be a natural and highly intuitive evolution of the familiar chassis and control layout. The new 77 mm HV gun, while substantially more powerful, was integrated into a gunnery system that allowed for quick and precise target acquisition and engagement. Training exercises were focused on exploiting the tank's high mobility, encouraging aggressive maneuvering and shoot-and-scoot tactics against heavier, slower German opposition. Commanders quickly realized the potential of the Comet's speed to dictate the terms of engagement, avoiding static duels where German heavy armor could hold an advantage. New emphasis was placed on the use of the APDS ammunition, training gunners to maximize its armor penetration capabilities against the frontal plates of the Panther and Tiger. The crews adapted quickly to the more complex ballistics of the high-velocity projectile, leading to high first-round hit probabilities in combat. The Comet's mechanical reliability, a vast improvement over many earlier British designs, also allowed for more continuous operational service and less time spent on maintenance. This high level of serviceability was a crucial factor in the fast-moving final campaigns across Germany's difficult terrain. The training ethos instilled confidence in the crews, assuring them that they were now driving a vehicle capable of fighting and winning against any tank the Germans could deploy. This restored morale and sense of qualitative equality was perhaps as important as the tank's technical specifications themselves. It marked a significant shift from the defensive and cautious mindset that had often characterized British armored operations earlier in the war. The Comet was a truly offensive weapon, and the training reflected a doctrine of aggressive, relentless exploitation of battlefield opportunities. Every crewman was rigorously trained to maximize the combination of speed and firepower that the new tank offered. The British armored divisions were now fully prepared to meet the enemy on equal, or even superior, terms in the tank-on-tank battles to come. When the Comet first engaged German forces, the reaction on the ground was one of immediate and profound surprise among the Panzerwaffe crews. German intelligence reports and battlefield assessments had consistently dismissed the development of a truly formidable British cruiser tank. The assumption was that the British would continue to rely on the venerable, if undergunned, Cromwell or the American-supplied Sherman. Therefore, when a new British tank began to cleanly and quickly knock out Panzer IVs, and even engage Panther tanks successfully, the tactical shock was immense. The devastating, high-velocity impact of the 77 mm HV's APDS round was unlike anything German crews had previously experienced from standard British weapons. Eyewitness accounts from captured German tank crews spoke of confusion and disbelief upon seeing their supposedly superior armor breached so decisively. German commanders, who had grown accustomed to the effective immunity of their heavy tanks at range, were suddenly faced with a completely new and unpredictable threat. The psychological comfort of their armor advantage was instantly shattered by the Comet's sudden and lethal arrival on the front lines. Initial engagement reports filtered back up the German chain of command, sparking urgent requests for new intelligence on the identity and capabilities of this mysterious new British tank. The Wehrmacht was forced to quickly revise its operational assumptions regarding the capabilities of their Western opponents. The Comet was fast, difficult to hit, and capable of striking a lethal blow before the German tanks could effectively traverse their turrets for a return shot. This shift meant that German tank crews could no longer rely on the sheer thickness of their frontal armor to survive a confrontation. They had to adopt more cautious, defensive, and ambush-focused tactics against an enemy they had previously dismissed as structurally inferior. The Comet's first engagements were small in scale, but massive in their psychological impact, signaling the end of an era of German overconfidence. The new British tank instantly became a high-priority target, but its speed and powerful gun made it a dangerous adversary to hunt down. The most significant measure of the Comet's success lay in its ability to effectively engage the German big cats, the Panther and the Tiger Eye tanks. The formidable frontal armor of these German heavy tanks had previously rendered most standard Allied guns ineffective, leading to a profound operational imbalance. The Comet's 77 mm HV gun was the first British-designed weapon to offer a reliable answer to this challenge, forcing German commanders to reassess their tactics. While the 17-pounder on the Sherman Firefly had achieved similar results, the Comet provided the necessary firepower in a better armored, more agile, and wholly British-designed package. In direct engagements, the Comet proved capable of penetrating the Panther's turret and side armor at considerable ranges, dramatically reducing the German tank's invulnerability. Although still challenged by the extremely thick frontal armor of the fearsome Tiger Eye, the Comet's mobility allowed its crews to actively seek flanking shots. This tactical flexibility was a crucial advantage in the fluid, urban, and forested fighting that characterized the final push into Germany. The Comet's appearance fundamentally changed the risk calculus for German tankers, who could no longer treat a British tank as a negligible threat. The German response was a frantic effort to concentrate their remaining heavy tank assets and to establish defensive ambush positions in key sectors. However, the British tank's superior rate of fire and excellent optics meant that once an enemy was sighted, the Comet often had the advantage of the first, decisive shot. The psychological effect on German crew morale was devastating, as they realized their technological edge had been decisively negated or even reversed. The Wehrmacht's narrative of unquestioned armor dominance was visibly and physically being destroyed on the muddy, frozen battlefields of 1945. Every Comet tank encountered was a tangible piece of evidence that the Allied technological momentum was now irreversible. This successful confrontation with the big cats secured the Comet's place as one of the most effective Allied tanks of the latter half of the war. The realization of the Comet's capabilities within the Wehrmacht was a slow and painful process, hampered by the chaotic collapse of their command structure and intelligence network. Initial reports of a powerful new British tank were often treated with skepticism or dismissed as isolated incidents by high command accustomed to exaggerations from the front. The ingrained prejudice against the perceived mediocrity of British armor proved a difficult bias for the German military hierarchy to overcome. As more reports confirmed the decisive firepower of the Comet, German tactical manuals and field orders began to be urgently revised to address the new threat. Tank commanders were specifically warned about the Comet's speed and the lethal capability of its high-velocity gun, which necessitated a change in engagement protocol. German doctrine shifted to avoid engaging the new British tank in open terrain and to instead prioritize carefully planned ambushes from concealed positions. The logistical crisis also played a significant role, preventing the Germans from deploying enough of their own latest, heaviest tanks, like the formidable Tiger II, to counter the Comet effectively. The sporadic and often disorganized nature of German resistance in early 1945 meant that countermeasures were rarely implemented consistently or at scale. The belated lessons learned were too little and arrived far too late to influence the final outcome of the war. The fundamental failure was not a lack of technical prowess in the German tank corps, but a catastrophic failure of pre-war intelligence and ingrained arrogance. They had dismissed their opponent for too long and now paid the ultimate price for underestimating the British capacity for innovation under pressure. The Comet represented the culmination of a learning curve that the Wehrmacht had never properly acknowledged. It was a final, undeniable statement of British industrial and military technological parity with their European adversaries. The successful crossing of the Rhine River in March 1945 was one of the final, pivotal moments of the Western Front, and the Comet tank played a prominent role in the spearhead. By this stage of the war, the Comet was a fully integrated and highly valued asset of the leading British armored divisions. Its combination of speed and anti-tank capability made it the ideal vehicle for the rapid exploitation and deep penetration maneuvers required to break into the German heartland. The tanks were instrumental in quickly clearing out isolated pockets of desperate German resistance encountered beyond the river's eastern bank. Their firepower was often deployed not just against other tanks, but in the high explosive role, clearing hardened German defensive positions in towns and villages. The Comet's mechanical reliability proved invaluable during the long, sustained advances across the fractured German road network and challenging terrain. Logistical lines were often stretched thin, making the dependability of the fighting vehicles absolutely critical for maintaining the momentum of the advance. The Comet's presence reassured the infantry that they were supported by armor capable of dealing with any sudden, fierce German counterattack. Its very name became a symbol of the unstoppable Allied advance, a sleek, powerful machine pushing relentlessly towards the core of the Third Reich. The tank crews, now confident in their equipment, executed their missions with a professionalism and aggression born of years of combat experience. The German defenders, often poorly supplied and crewed by exhausted, demoralized conscripts, were completely unable to stop the Comet-led charge. The tanks sliced through the remaining German defenses with an efficiency that hastened the inevitable collapse of the Western Front. The drive across the plains of Germany highlighted the true potential of the Comet as the ultimate expression of the fast, hard-hitting cruiser concept. It was a force multiplier, giving the British armored units a decisive technical and psychological edge in the final, brutal weeks of the conflict. Beyond its purely physical destructive power, the Comet exerted a significant psychological toll on the remaining German forces. The sight of a new, powerful, and previously unseen British tank driving deep into the heartland of Germany served as a stark, undeniable symbol of total defeat. German soldiers, who had been fed propaganda about the inferiority of Allied equipment, were confronted with a tangible refutation of those claims on their own soil. The comet represented the overwhelming industrial capacity and technological momentum of the Allied powers that the Wehrmacht could no longer hope to match. For the German civilians, the sudden, swift appearance of these tanks was a clear indication that the front line was collapsing and that the war was irrevocably lost. The tank's relatively sleek, modern profile, compared to the boxy, battle-weary look of earlier Allied designs, spoke of a war machine that was not just powerful but evolving. This late-war technological parity was a final, bitter pill for the German military to swallow, proving that their initial technological lead had been completely lost. The feeling of hopelessness among the German defenders intensified with every report of a comet appearing in an unexpected location. The high speed of the tank suggested a flanking maneuver or a deep thrust, adding to the general confusion and disorganization of the crumbling German defense. German forces could no longer rely on any piece of their arsenal to provide a guaranteed advantage against this new adversary. The Comet became an icon of the final, victorious push, a mechanical manifestation of the Allied resolve to secure an unconditional surrender. Its presence on the streets of German towns and cities was the ultimate proof that the Wehrmacht's early arrogance regarding British armor had been tragically misplaced. The arrival of the Comet announced the end of the war to those who still chose to fight. The Comet tank's combat career, while short, was immensely influential in the subsequent development of British armor. It proved the fundamental soundness of the new armament and chassis combination, successfully bridging the gap between wartime expediency and post-war requirements. The Comet was the crucial, necessary stepping stone toward the development of the iconic Centurion main battle tank, which would define British armor for decades. The Centurion took the Comet's successful design principles, including the powerful armament and Christie suspension lineage, and scaled them up for greater armor protection and firepower. The 77mm HV gun technology directly contributed to the legendary and powerful 20-pounder gun that armed the early Centurion models. The Comet was the last of the classic British cruiser tanks, ending a distinguished lineage that stretched back to the very beginning of the war. Its reputation for reliability, speed, and hard-hitting capability cemented its place in the history of armored warfare. Though the conflict ended just months after its deployment, the Comet fundamentally altered the German perception of British armored strength. It was a definitive counterargument to the narrative of technological weakness that the Wehrmacht had fostered for so long. The tank served successfully in the British Army for many years after the war, a testament to its robust and forward-thinking design. Today, preserved examples of the Comet stand as a tangible reminder of the crucial, final technological triumph of the British war effort. Its design principles and combat effectiveness continue to be studied by historians and armor enthusiasts as a model of successful wartime innovation. The Comet proved that the British could not only adapt, but could also design and field a truly superior and decisive fighting vehicle.